Number one, the presumption of his claim. I mentioned this last week, but there is a convenient myth among modern people that the true Jesus, the real Jesus, the one who actually wandered around Jerusalem, was likely just an itinerant moral teacher, a good moral teacher, maybe ahead of his time, a societal revolutionary, if you will, maybe even a messenger with a special connection to the divine, similar to the Buddha, to Abraham, to Muhammad, and to other great lights in our history, but he didn't think of himself as God. No, that claim to divinity, they like to say, that was a kind of legend imposed on Jesus later. And some Christian cults today, like the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, will say that Jesus never really claimed to be God, but that's not true. Jesus' claim to be God was central to his teaching in the book of John. It is the core of what he is saying in moments like this one. And not just by using the name I am, which is significant in itself, but in all the imagery behind it. He was saying, I am the voice. I was the voice speaking in the burning bush. I was the cloud of God's presence that led you through the wilderness. I was the glory that dwelled in the Holy of Holies. All those manifestations that Moses and your forefathers called God, that was me. They knew exactly what he was saying, by the way. Verse 20 says, look in your Bible, John 8:20, that they tried to arrest him when he said that. They weren't trying to arrest him because he was claiming to be an unusually insightful teacher, but because he was claiming to be God's presence. In fact, just a few minutes later in the same discussion, the Pharisees are gonna confront Jesus by telling him, they're gonna say, you shouldn't be claiming all this authority for yourself. And Jesus responds to them, verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw my day and was glad. So the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old. We talking about seeing Abraham and him seeing you and being happy about you coming around. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Not before Abraham was, I was, but before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Why were they picking up stones? Not because he was using bad grammar, but because in saying before Abraham was, I am, he was claiming to be God. They knew exactly what he was saying. The other variation of this myth is that these kinds of bold claims by Jesus to deity only occur in the Gospel of John. And John presents Jesus differently than other gospel writers. The reasoning goes like this. In the earlier Gospels, the earliest written Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, that's where we find Jesus, the hippie moral revolutionary. And only John, some will say, puts in all the big God stuff, and that's written years and years later. But that is not true either, for a couple reasons. First, John was not written that much later than the other Gospels. True, it was most likely the last gospel written, but it was still within the first generation of Christian followers. But second, and more importantly, the other gospel writers most certainly put forward Jesus' divinity. They do it a little more subtly, because as Jesus himself said, he preferred to let people discover that he was God through the works that he did, rather than just through outright claims. Anybody could just claim to be God. Jesus wanted to demonstrate it and let people arrive at that conclusion on their own. But it's in there. For example, in Matthew and Mark, Jesus says, tear down this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days. Matthew and Mark both note that in saying that, Jesus was talking about himself. For the Jews, the temple was the place where God dwelled. Jesus said, I am the new temple. That's a pretty strong claim to divinity. Or how about this one? In all three of the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus forgave sins. And when the Pharisees objected, saying, you can't say that, only God can forgive sins, Jesus does not dispute their reasoning. Instead, Jesus backs up his claim to be able to forgive sins by making a lame man walk. And then he says, hey, if I got the power to make a lame man walk, which we all know only God could do, maybe you should also believe me when I say I can forgive sins. Matthew and Luke both record 5 different times, mostly toward the end of Jesus' life, when the disciples worshiped Jesus, something Jews believed was reserved for God only. So yes, the other gospel writers put forward Jesus' deity. They develop it differently than John does, but it's there. And that's not to mention, by the way, Paul's letters to the church, which predate the Gospels, they're all crystal clear about Jesus' deity. So all that means is that the idea that Jesus was one of history's great lights who had perhaps a special connection to deity like many others, that idea though popular among college professors, is just not true. Ironically, one of the greatest assessments of this in modern times comes from U2's Bono. He said this in an interview with his biographer, Mika Asias. The secular response to the Christ story always goes like this. He was a great prophet. Obviously a very interesting fella. He had a lot to say along the lines of other great prophets, be they Elijah, Muhammad, Buddha, or Confucius. But actually, Christ says, no, I'm not saying I'm a teacher. Don't call me a teacher. I'm not saying I'm a prophet. I'm saying I'm God incarnate. And people say, no, please, just be a prophet. A prophet we can take. I mean, you're a bit eccentric, but we've had John the Baptist eating locusts and wild honey. We can handle a central prophet, but not God, not the Messiah. Because we're gonna have to crucify you if you say that. And he goes, no, I actually am the Messiah. At this point, everybody starts staring at their shoes and says, oh my God, he's gonna keep saying this. So what you're left with is either Christ was who he said he was, God incarnate, the Messiah, or a complete nutcase. I mean, we're talking nutcase on the level of Charles Manson. I'm not joking here. The idea that the entire course of civilization for over half of the globe could have had its fate changed and turned upside down by a nutcase, well, for me, that's a bit far-fetched. Not bad, Bono, all right? Seems like he might have finally found what he's looking for, am I right? Okay? Jesus claimed to be light. Y'all, he claimed to be the very radiance of God's glory. So that's the presumption of this claim. Don't miss it.